And a bit of a story we are following up for you. The Republic of Burkina Faso has reportedly recalled its ambassador to Ghana over fresh diplomatic row with the Republic of Ghana. President Akufo-Addo, as you recall, Wednesday told U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that the presence of Russian mercenaries in Burkina Faso, close to Ghana's borders, continues to threaten the peace and security of the northern territories of our country. Well, we've been capturing all of the back and forth for you in this report.
This is a very good occasion, but it's a particularly good occasion because
it all started when President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, met U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the sidelines of the U.S.-Africa Summit.
Today, Russian mercenaries are on our northern border. Burkina Faso has now entered into an arrangement to go along with Mali in employing the Wagner forces there. I believe a mine in southern Burkina has been allocated to them as a form of payment for their services. Prime Minister of Burkina Faso in the last 10 days has been in Moscow. And to have them operating on our northern border is particularly distressing for us in Ghana. Apart from not accepting the idea of
President Akufo-Addo further called for partnership with the U.S. government in foiling what he sees as a growing threat to democracy in the West African sub-region.
And therefore, they're now to have this group at our borders is a matter of some considerable disquiet and concern for us. We really like to have a privileged opportunity to talk about its implications and what we believe ought to be the case.
But the move met the displeasure of the military junta in Burkina Faso, which has already recalled Burkinabe ambassador to Ghana, while summoning Ghana's top resident diplomat in the Sahelian country. The Russian government will make no pronouncement on the matter except to share the critical opinion of some Ghanaian experts who have called out the president for making a wrong move. But U.S. Ambassador to Ghana, Virginia Palmer, says the Wagner is acting as a proxy for the Russian state.
Of course, just what's happening in Burkina Faso. Is the West or the East a part of the problem?
You're being more diplomatic than I will be. I will be direct. I think, the Wagner is acting as a proxy for the Russian state. And I think that's dangerous for democracy and peace and security in the sub-region.
For now, all of Ghana's officials remain tight-lipped, and it's unclear what remedial measures may be taken to resolve this diplomatic row.
So that's a roundup of the activities for you. But this is becoming a diplomatic row as we're capturing it. I want to bring in now Colonel Festus Boaji, retired. Dr. Ishmael Honvo is also an international relations analyst with the University of Education, Winneba. Adib Sane is a security analyst. But I want to start off with you, Colonel retired Festus Boaji. Welcome to the polls. The president talks about the Wagner forces. I'm sure that many of us here in Ghana may not be aware of the extent to which this force is deadly to a country's security or national security, if we could put it that way. For those who are not aware about the operations, are you able to educate us on this Wagner forces that we're hearing of? Kindly unmute for me so I can get the point you're making.
Thanks for having me. Now, the Wagner, arguably, is a paramilitary company or private security company, except that it has very close links with the Russian state, and is reported to even have access to Russian defense institutions. So it is now present in a number of African countries, largely conflict-ridden countries, like the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso that we're talking about. There has been some debate about their presence in Mali, Mozambique, and so on and so forth. Now, They are there in these countries at the invitation of the de facto governments. It is not that Russia on its own or of its own accord deployed these Wagner elements into those states. So as far as Ghana is concerned, I think we have bilateral relations with Burkina Faso, and we also relate to Burkina Faso multilaterally within the ECOWAS framework as well as within the African Union. If the presence of the Wagner in Burkina Faso is of concern to us, we have structures, regional structures within which to address the issue. First of all, we have the Accra Initiative, which met about a month ago. So we can use that framework to resolve whatever issues we have with Burkina over the presence of Wagner close to our borders. We have ECOWAS. Then we have the African Union. My concern over this diplomatic spat is why our leader, the government or the president, took this matter, which is the local issue, of course, with sub-regional dimensions, all the way to the US Africa Leadership Summit. All along, we have been seeing, especially when the president was the chairperson of the ECOWAS, using ECOWAS structures to try and resolve some of these issues. Is it that the president believes only in ECOWAS and other African structures when he is at the helm of affairs? And when he is not, then he seeks now to internationalize some of these issues by taking the issue all the way to Washington. What has happened in the process, therefore, is to bring.
What did you say? It appears that we're having some challenges connecting back to Colonel Festus the Boaji retired. We'll get to his point wrapped up for you. Of course, we'll try to reconnect the lines. So apologies there. We lost you briefly on the very last point you were making. Yeah. You were saying that the president chose the wrong platform. But for some, the belief is that the president was being pragmatic. The issue about the need for partnerships. He describes America as, quote, a reliable partner. Is this not much more of cooperation to you than as you're trying to describe it to be a case of reporting a fellow African country?
What was the objective of the US Africa Leadership Summit? What were some of the remarks that the US president made? The theme, the main theme of the US president's address is now trying to bring the governance factor into its discourses with African member states. And I've had reason to point out that the greatest threat to the stability of Africa and its member states is not the presence of Wagner on anybody's borders, nor the presence of terrorists. It is the weak governance structures which has compounded state fragility within the continent that now makes it liable to all of these threats. See, so there's nothing wrong with it. Maybe nothing wrong with the president taking the issue to Washington. But I think charity should have started at home. We could have avoided this diplomatic spat with Burkina Faso. And even before I conclude that point, let me make it clear that the major conflict in West Africa over the long term were won as a result of close diplomatic relations among ECOWAS member states and the wider African states. I'm referring to both Liberia and Sierra Leone. We need Burkina Faso, good or bad, to be part of our approach to resolving any security threat within the Sahel. Of course, we have waited all these years, from about 2012 when Libya imploded, to about 2015, 2017, when the onslaught was now against Burkina Faso, to realize that no, Accra probably may not be safe. Then we have resorted to this tendency of Africa to be layering its security arrangement. So this Accra initiative, which only last November, decided now to establish a task force, which should be ready within 1 month. So already the task force should be ready. But I'm not sure whether it's ready, and I don't think it is ready. This Accra Initiative task force is in addition of the G5 Sahel, of which Burkina Faso and 4 or so other African countries in the Sahel are members. Then we have the multinational joint task force in the Lake Chad Basin region. Then we have a coalition of other groups fighting Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Regional security cannot be fragmented in that nature. It must be one of broader collaboration. And therefore, I think the Accra Initiative, which to my mind is not even recognized as yet, diplomatically, politically recognized by ECOWAS, and certainly not by the African Union, is not going to be the solution to Ghana's security problems.
Okay, I want you to take your thoughts on...
Ghana needs a...
Yeah, I want you to take your thoughts on what it is that the president was specific about. The fact that the presence of the Wagner forces in the northern parts of our country, closer to the northern parts of our country, poses a security threat. Of course, you've been in the service for long, so it goes without saying that you have some appreciable knowledge on how secure our northern frontiers are. Do you feel that the president has got his intelligence report right, or perhaps he may be relying on some other sources which may not or may be alien to that of our forces?
Well, it will be a bit difficult to say whether the intelligence report that he has received is correct or not. But it could be subject to different interpretations. One interpretation is that the Wagner group in Burkina Faso was invited to Burkina Faso by the de facto government. Now, you cannot sit outside of the borders of Burkina Faso and determine whether that government is a good or bad or the right government or not the right government. Again, we could see the operations of Wagner as helping to stabilize Burkina Faso and therefore reduce the threat that the terrorist onslaught, poses to Ghana. But on the other hand also, it may very well be that when these terrorists come under pressure, as well as the displacements that the operations might entail, they could be pushed into Ghana and therefore could have other humanitarian security exigencies for the country. But the way to have gone about it was to closely collaborate with Burkina Faso, either bilaterally or multilaterally within the Accra Initiative, for which we have established structures to resolve that issue. I said it last night, and I don't think that the mere presence of Wagner within the territories of Burkina Faso in close proximity to our northern borders is necessarily a security threat to Ghana, unless we have intelligence that there have been cross-border incursions by Wagner into the territory of Ghana. And as of now, the government of Ghana has not told Ghanaians that Wagner has crossed our borders and has operated within our sovereign territory. So I hold a contrary view. And my view is that I don't think taking the Wagner issue, in other words, expanding this discourse, bringing Russia in and placing Russia against the US, and therefore bringing the Russian-Ukrainian war dynamics into West Africa as another proxy dynamic is going to be helpful to us. It's not going to be.
Indeed,
we are also a partner to Russia. Yes, please.
I was just about referring to what it is that Russia has been posting, but I just want you to hold on for us briefly. Let's also bring in Dr. Ishmael Honvo and Adib Sani. Adib Sani's post was retweeted by the Russian embassy here in Ghana. Let's hear from them briefly. I'll take your thoughts on that as well. But Dr. Ishmael Honvo, welcome to the show. The issue about Ghana's posture, non-alliance as we know it to be for some time now. Are we beginning to depart from that, looking at the president's statement? And kindly unmute for me so I can hear you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you and your viewers. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
Okay. We are not yet out of our non-aligned movement, but this particular comment of the president smacks of a kind of Cold War mentality, where you assume that anything that has to do with Russia is diametrically opposed to anything US. So for that matter, if the Russian group operates close to our borders and trying to help Burkina Faso, if it is confirmed, that means that then it automatically means that we need the assistance of the US. I think that that particular approach will not help matters, because we must be able as a region to shield ourselves from this kind of Cold War division that seems to be creeping back into the world. We still have very good relation with Russia, notwithstanding our stand. Of course, we are free to take our stand that the war in Ukraine is not what we want. That is fair. But to project it to areas such as our relation with Burkina Faso in relation to terrorism means that we are operating on a particular paradigm that view the whole thing as a new setup for Cold War. And if there is even a Cold War, it is not in our interest to kind of operate in that paradigm. We need Burkina Faso, we need all the states in West Africa to be able to address this issue of terrorism in the sub-region. So if we start in this manner antagonizing our neighbors, it will not help us in the long run. So I think that yes, we still maintain.
Yeah, but the question is, what other options?
But this particular comment.
Yeah, I was just asking about yes, Doc, I was just asking about the options. What options did the president have? Some say that looking at our position, we need more military capacity, which we don't have. I mean, in terms of being adequate. So we need the help of bigger countries such as the United States, correct?
You need help of the bigger countries, the United States, Russia. You need all of them. You don't only need one side. See, so we must maintain our position of being in the middle, where you can call on any of them at any time for assistance. Now, if we will take the issue very critically, assuming without admitting that Burkina Faso actually went in for this group, what is the intent? The intent is that they have been facing a major terrorist problem for a very long time. And as a sub-region, we were not able to give the necessary assistance to kind of curtail this onslaught of the terrorists. Therefore, as a country that is in need, they look at their options and perhaps they've chosen this option. Now, if this group is able to bring stability to Burkina Faso, it is also to our benefit. So we must not interpret it as if to say that the group is everything bad. So far as we engage that group, you have committed a kind of offense. Or so far as you engage with Russia, it's a kind of offense. That's how this comment seems to be like. And you see, it's not something that we should be championed based on our position, because the president was just recently the ECOWAS chairman, and then he was at the forefront of trying to find solution to most of the things that are happening in the sub-region. So if you have led the group throughout this period, if you have a concern with Burkina Faso, it is appropriate that you reach out to them to understand. Because if you look at the comment, he said, I believe that they have been given a mine in exchange. So it means that perhaps the intelligence he has is not even conclusive, because you are not very categorical in what exactly it is. Now, even if you have this intelligence about our neighbor Burkina Faso, the appropriate thing to do is to engage them as to what the intent is, what exactly the operational parameters of the group will be. If you do that, then Burkina Faso is still with you, because you cannot fight terrorism in Ghana without Burkina Faso.
Okay,
And indeed,
how do we
while
reverse?
we need military...
I'm just wondering, how do we reverse what's being created now?
Of course, we still can reach out to Burkina Faso and dialogue with them and let them understand that, well, it is in the context of maybe trying to solicit the help of the U.S. to help all of us in the region. Yes, of course, we have not yet cut off diplomatic relations. So I think that we'll go through the process diplomatically, and the diplomats will come out on top of it, and then we reconcile with them, because we need Burkina Faso to be stable, for Ghana to also be stable. Indeed, we cannot always rely on the military solution here. Many of the causes of terrorism in West Africa are known to our leaders. Indeed, governance has been a major problem. And of course, if you look at the causes, unemployment, all these problems have governmental failures to put in policies that will address the needs of the people. So therefore, if you are going to deal with terrorism, it's not only about one country's approach of another group that you should be dealing with. We must be concerned with growing unemployment, particularly among the youth, because that is one area. We must also be concerned about how we govern our borders. What is the collaboration between Ghana and Burkina Faso in terms of governing the border? Those are issues that we still need, because Ghana as a country cannot police its borders without the help of the others at the other side. So these are very important issues that we must be addressing if we need to get forward.
And I'll be coming to Colonel Retired shortly on one important issue about repairing the seeming damage. But I want to bring in Adipsani first of all before we do that. Adipsani, your tweet was, or post, of course, you've put up a lengthy article. That article has been retweeted by the Russian embassy here in Ghana. The belief or the interpretation we're having is perhaps they share in that opinion. They did same for Dr. Vladimir Enchidanso as well, who's calling out President Akufo-Addo for bringing some sort of a Cold War closer to our borders. You say that the president is also jeopardizing with the country's security. How so?
Well, we need Burkina Faso in protecting our northern frontier than the U.S. It is in Ghana's interest for Wagner to operate in Burkina Faso because the French have not been able to help. In fact, the French rather made things worse. When they came in, the militants didn't control 60% of Burkina Faso. Today, they control 60% of Burkinabe territory. So you can imagine, if they decide to let loose their borders, the implications it would have on our national security. And the Burkinabe Prime Minister, when he came to Ghana, didn't mince words in saying it. And if you feel what we are feeling, then you would know that action has to be taken to stem the tide of terrorism in West Africa. And I'm particularly shocked that, the president, being a former diplomat and knowing the implications of certain comments, would say what he said. As a student of diplomacy, we say that the art of diplomacy is telling someone to go to hell. In a nice way, the person would ask you for direction to hell. That is why it is imperative that we exercise a great deal of circumspection and responsibility, when making certain utterances, especially that has to do with the East-West the divide. We have no business there.
I guess you're giving the benefit of the doubt to the president as being the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Perhaps he has intelligence and has, weighed the option, sees the U.S. as a, quote, reliable partner. That's how he's referring to the U.S. Where else can we get help from?
The thing is, the same president has been an advocate of African problems requiring African solutions. He's been an ECOWAS chair before. What did he do about the situation? Okay, so if we are roommates, we share secrets. One day we have issues, then the next minute you go out there telling people my secrets. You think I'll trust you again? So what he has done, has broken the trust between Ghana and Burkina Faso. One, they wouldn't share intelligence with us any longer because they feel that if they give us the intelligence, we might go tell the Americans. Two, it's going to affect our ability to implement different aspects of the Accra Initiative. Just about a month ago, they invited us to the Accra International Conference Center to agree on certain modalities on the way forward. And a lot of commitment was made in that regard. So what the president did is going to return us to square one, because there will be less cooperation between Ghana and Burkina Faso, and probably, and we need to take this into consideration, probably Malians who have also been working closely with the Wagner group. Mercenaries is no new, is no news. The Americans have dealt with mercenaries before the Blackwater, and then the president was the foreign minister then, when Blackwater was wreaking havoc in Iraq. The Turkish have their mercenaries fighting against Assad in Syria. The Egyptians have their mercenaries fighting alongside Colonel Haftar in Libya. The Emiratis, the Saudi Arabians, the British, and all that. Okay, so it is not news. I don't know why we have decided to swell ourselves by meddling in this, international geopolitical chess game. We have no business there whatsoever. And I think the president's statement in that regard is unfortunate. And we need to do a lot of work in managing the damage that has been caused already.
Okay, let's be practical then. I'll start off with Colonel Retired Festus Eboaji. How do we repair the damage?
Are you talking to me?
Colonel, you'd have to unmute so we can hear the point you're making, Colonel.
I have. I'm saying that, first of all, in spite of all that is happening, the president of Ghana, for that matter, Ghana has channels open to Ouagadougou through telephone calls, through our embassies, and so on and so forth. But because this has a regional or sub-regional context, the structures that ECOWAS has, we have a Council of the Wise, just like the Council of State, eminent citizens of West Africa drawn from some of the respective countries that could intervene in order to de-escalate the tension. We have the president of the commission, the senior civil servant of the ECOWAS Commission, who could also step into the fray. But technically, we have the Mediation and Security Council, from the ministers of security, national security, defense, and so on, down to chiefs of defense and whatever it is, and so on. All of these structures could play a role. Indeed, other citizens like Ambassador Ibn Chambers, who has headed ECOWAS, has headed the UN office in the Sahel and West Africa and so on, could all play a role. In the long run, we need the two parties, Ghana and Burkina Faso, to sit together and resolve this. And I think we should also desist, going forward, from internationalizing issues with our neighbors. That is not the way to resolve bilateral issues. And as some of my colleagues have said, nobody can point us to the presence of Western partners in Africa, in West Africa, anywhere in the world that has helped to resolve, substantively and permanently or sustainably the security issues that we have. What Wagner is doing, as Adib said, could not be done by France. They've not been able to do it. Now they've hung their gloves and they have signaled that they are leaving West Africa. So each country has to find its own mechanisms to resolve its issues. And in Burkina Faso, because the rest of us were aloof, calling ourselves coastal states and allowing Burkina Faso, to deal with its own devices, then let us respect whatever decisions they've made. And let me probably end on this note, that the question of paying for security assistance with mining concessions is not new in Africa. During the Mano region area conflicts in Liberia and Sierra Leone, Even British mercenary groups, Sandline International, were given mining concessions, diamond concessions, to pay for their security assistance to Kaba and Co. So there's nothing new. It's happening in the DRC, it's happening in the, Central African Republic. If a sovereign state decides that I cannot pay you in dollars or gold, but I've got minerals, you go and mine and pay for whatever it is. It's like Ghana saying that I'm going to use gold to buy petroleum. Nobody anywhere in the world can take Ghana to task and say, why are you not using dollars to pay for your petroleum supplies? So I think we need to respect the sovereignty of our neighbors.
Would it be prudent to have the president? Would it be prudent to have the president apologize publicly on this?
He could do that in different ways. He could retract through his Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Minister for Foreign Affairs and so on. He could send a high-level delegation to Ouagadougou to try and mend fences and so on and so forth. But the signaling that you don't take African issues, that you have not tabled in Abuja, you have not tabled, or even if you did, you have not pursued in Addis Ababa, all the way to Washington. You don't do that. It's a clear declaration that you have lost confidence in the African structure that one of my colleagues said, finding African solutions to African problems. And the fact of the matter remains that no Western partner can help Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Nigeria to deal with the security problems that we have. Nobody. It's ourselves, like we did in Liberia, we did in Sierra Leone, who should find the solutions, but permanently, on a sustainable basis. Let's address the governance deficits. You may argue with me that Ghana is democratic. I have been known to be saying that democracy is not an absolute. It's a spectrum. And the democracy that we have could one day fall prey to the circumstances of Burkina Faso. The dynamics, the driving factors of terrorism, violent extremism, radicalization are all present in our society. We need to deepen governance, the respect for human rights, democratic accountability, and so on and so forth. That is how we prevent the kind of situation that we are in. But as for Wagner, I don't think Wagner is ever going to cross into Ghanaian territory 1 inch, whether in pursuit of terrorists or whatever. Indeed, I hold the view, and I stand to be corrected, that Wagner's presence on our northern borders will rather help to stabilize, Burkina Faso territory in close proximity to our borders, so we can have the time and the space to look for some constructive, substantive security responses if and when the terrorists choose to attack Ghana.
If there's anything the president is confirming, he's clearly telling us that the northern borders of our country may not be safe. How do we assure residents of the area, or what moves do we make by our security agencies to restore confidence in terms of security-wise in the area?
Well, there are several ways. One of the positions that I hold has been alluded to, that the issues of instability are not only, or should not only be seen through security lenses. Indeed, the root causes of instability, whether in the form of violent armed conflict or whatever it is, are always developmental, are always governance, are always whatever it is. So rather than invest in this so-called Accra Initiative Task Force, let's imagine that we invested in development, formed a task force to deploy into our northern borders or other border areas and the rest of the country to offer development. And last week, at a certain forum, it was said that Benin has deployed such a mechanism or an approach and has recruited South African, whatever they are, not to be fighting terrorists, but to be digging boreholes, providing services that if and when terrorists take over your territory, they provide. So that is one of the approaches that we should adopt. yes, let's look for the military solutions, but that should not be the long-term approach. The medium to long-term must be to develop the rest of Ghana, address the socio-economic needs, the wide inequality gaps, and so on and so forth. And then two, to mend fences with Burkina Faso. Three, to educate Ghanaians. So we've been told that, say what you see or something like that.
If you see something,
the question is, if I see something,
if you
say something.
Say something, yes.
Now, what exactly are the citizens to see? Is it that they must look for grenades, pistols? Do they know what explosive devices are? When they see a terrorist, can they identify who a terrorist is? You know, when people are now struggling to survive. So the whole approach, even that architecture itself, is not foolproof. It's just like slogans thrown into the mix, you know, which may not help. I don't know exactly what it is that we have on the borders, but of course we have our immigration services there. And I want to believe that we have plainclothes, whatever, security elements there. We have other uniformed personnel, you know, deployed in different guises. We may have gadgets, technology, and so on and so forth. But all of that may not 100%, you know, protect us against the onslaught of terrorists. The history of the Sahel shows that wherever the terrorists have come, they have latched onto existing fault lines, which could be historical, which could be religious, which could be racial, which would be socio-economic. So rather than fear the presence of Wagner and the terrorists, can we look for some of these cleavages in our society? What are they? That if anybody comes, they are going to use to radicalize in order to turn them into violent extremists, to attack their own state or their own government. That is what we should be doing, but I'm not seeing that.
Right.
And last week, somewhere I pointed out that look at the national strategy for countering violent extremism and terrorism. Look for the portion which says that one of the approaches will be to resource local government. That is theory. It's academic. But ask yourself in practice, have we resourced local governments to provide the services that the local populations need? Our priorities are elsewhere. The priority is building a cathedral. It is not providing boreholes. It is not fixing schools. And over the recent past weeks, we've seen a number of schools that you have been showing, dilapidated, you know. So priority misplacement is part of the problem. But why are the priorities misplaced? Sometimes it's for personal gain. Sometimes for personal gain, not for the welfare and the well-being of the citizen who is the sovereign of this state. And we need to get the priorities right. So far, I don't think that our priorities are right. There are so many things we've done, continue to do, which sound nice, but in the long run, that do not, you know, accrue to stability and sustainable peace and so on.
Right. And I'm grateful that you've been able to join us, Colonel Retired Festus
Thank you.
Abuaji. Thank you for your time. Let's wrap up with Dr. Ishmael Hovo and Adib Sani. And Doc, I just want to take your thoughts on the approach and posture of the president during the entire sessions, the various sessions that we've seen at the US-Africa Summit. He seems to be adopting a posture where he says, well, Africa must wean itself off aid and support, not necessarily support, but handouts from the West. He says, stop begging. I just want to paraphrase what is the president has been talking about. I mean, the approach of the president for you, does it really justify what we're seeing, I mean, in the various bilaterals and the high-level engagements it's been engaged in?
I think that the president seems to be saying one thing and then committing to another. In the sense that even as we see with this comment on Burkina Faso, he's trying to get the US to support Ghana in providing security. Of course, when you run an economy that is virtually dependent on foreign aid, yes, you may have a future position where you think that Africa must get rid itself of foreign aid. But as it is now, it is impossible to totally do away with foreign aid. So you will still have to negotiate with foreign parties in order to address some of your challenges. But of course, he may be right in calling to African leaders. We need to build structures and systems that allow us to get out of aid. So I want to understand his comment within the broader context of the futuristic Africa, where we are able to finance ourselves without aid. But if you look at it critically as it is now, his comment and what we do seems to be totally opposite. And of course, when you come back to the issue of Burkina Faso, I would expect that if we will get ourselves rid of foreign interest or foreign aid and other sort of foreign assistance, then one, you should be able to address Burkina Faso without calling for foreign assistance. You must be able to engage your brother in the north without calling for foreign assistance. That is one way to demonstrate that the words you are preaching to Africans are actually what you meant. But if you, on one breath, say that let's get ourselves independent of them, and then on another breath, you are virtually putting your neighbor to the sword. I mean, it's as if you are becoming a contradiction, which is not what we all expect of our president. So I think that going forward, the few things must be done quickly. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs must put out a statement there to kind of reassure Burkina Faso of our support in trying to deal with this terrorist thing. And of course, we must begin to look at how we can strengthen border governance, not only in terms of putting personnel on the border. We must be able, as it were, to look at border areas as areas of particular interest. What has happened is that most African countries, the state is very present in areas where there's resource extraction. So a border post where people pass and can pay revenue, a lot of state security apparatus is there. But in remote areas, the state is virtually absent. So those people are left to these groups, and when they come in, they settle there, provide them with social infrastructure. And that is how they're able to win people. So we must begin to work with our brothers to demonstrate what the president is saying. We must be able to work with all the other African countries around us so that we will give substance to our position that Africans need to find African solution to their problem. But currently, of course, the one engagement talks about being independent, then another engagement talks about we need your help to deal with terrorism because our brothers have gone to Russia. This is not appropriate as it is. So I think that the whole process have not been that managed well in terms of consistency in what we are seeing.
Right. Dr. Angovo, thank you for joining us here on The Pulse. And a bit of an update for you. When the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism has put out a statement on the latest development. We'll bring you excerpts of what it is that the group has been raising, pointing out some martyrs. But I want to bring in also now, of course, the executive director for that center, Mukhtar Mumuni Mukhtar. He's joining alongside Adib Sani, who's on with us. Just before I come to Adib, Mukhtar Mumuni Mukhtar, you've issued a statement. What are the key considerations now for you, knowing that the matter has degenerated? Now we have Burkina Faso recalling their ambassador for some more consultations.
Okay. Well, as we are learning now, we're seeing that this matter seems to be escalating in terms of the rift that it brings with it. And earlier, this morning, I spoke about it to a few media houses here, and I was very, very worried in terms of what it could mean for us in terms of regional security and in terms of the cooperation we need in the region in dealing with the very serious issues that we've been confronted with in terms of violent extremism. If you look at the conversation, if you listen carefully throughout the conversation, first of all, you would see that our president raised very serious and very important, points about regional security, about governance and democracy, and the issues that are important for, for development. Unfortunately, the very preliminary comments relating to the presence of Russia Wagner's presence in Burkina Faso, in Mali, seem to have taken away a lot from that supposedly very good conversation. And for that, I think it was a big miscalculation or a misjudgment on the part of our president. What we need to do now is to have, for instance, maybe the Foreign Affairs Ministry to try to sanitize conversation around it. Other than that, we are in a situation where we should be expecting escalation of this problem going forward.
What are the likely implications from the perspective of your center? When able to hear you, if you could just make that point for me again, Mukhtar Momoni Mukhtar. If you could just make the point for me again, kindly unmute. Okay, we've lost Mukhtar there. Adib, let's bring you back and let's look at the way forward. What is, first of all, your interpretation of the decision by the foreign mission, I mean the Russian mission here in Ghana, to put out your statement? Is it the case, and do you deduce that they side with you, the fact that you believe the president is jeopardizing, of course, the country's security? Is that what you see through what's been done online?
There's no denying that fact. I mean, I'm not surprised, because mostly when I put up, statements, I have a number of missions picking it up and putting it on their social media handles. So I'm not surprised about this. However, first of all, we have to accept the fact that what happened is a major, monumental diplomatic gaffe. It is a monumental diplomatic gaffe, and we have to accept it. Then we can come out with ways to deal with it. And mind you, we can never win the fight against terrorism in West Africa without Burkina Faso. It is in our interest to have Wagner operate in Burkina Faso, because for years on end, the Burkinabe military has no capacity or capability to counter the threats. Hence, you see that they are expanded by the day. And Burkina Faso, as a sovereign country, can decide to go into a defense cooperation agreement with any country, so far as it doesn't pose any security threat to any country. I couldn't have agreed with Colonel Festus Abuajibo.
And it goes the other way, isn't it? When the president says, well, I want to side with the U.S. After all, what's wrong with that?
You see, Soga, we have for years on end, and a lot of international recognition, respect, and favor because of our posture to international politics. But immediately, we start aligning with one side, then we would have problems with the other side. Okay? And fighting terrorism knows no east nor west. We need to be collective. We need to be collaborative in our approach. But if you have issues within, then you don't discuss it within and perhaps seek possible solutions and decide to go before the Foreign Affairs Minister of the United States. It's unfortunate, it's demeaning, it's disrespectful, and telling them what they already know. Are you the one to tell the Americans about Wagner? For crying out loud. It's unfortunate. I don't know who advised the president to toe this line in the first place. And I think it is important, like I indicated, for us to accept that, yes, it is a monumental diplomatic gaffe, and so the need for us to realign, so to speak, our relationship or reset our relationship with Burkina Faso. If not, and I'm saying this without mincing words, there are so many ways Burkina Faso can hurt us. We wouldn't want to go there. We need to be friends with them so collaboratively we can stem the tide of terrorism in West Africa. We met at Accra International Conference Center. We spoke a lot about the need for us to synergize our approach towards fighting terrorism, the need for countries to come together, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, Ivory Coast, Togo, etc. But if there's no trust, it makes nonsense of all the efforts that has been put in to get us to where we are today. I know. National security officials will not be happy about it. I know. Diplomatic officials will not be happy about it. But nobody dare talk. But for us within the civil society, we need to let the politicians know that, hey, what you are doing is not going to help us, but rather put us in a precarious situation. And I think it's important that immediately we dispatch a high-powered delegation to Burkina Faso to see how we can pragmatically and diplomatically reset our relationship with them.
Adib Sani is a security analyst. I'm grateful for your time. Let's wrap everything up with Mukhtar Mouni. Mukhtar, let's talk about the call from Adib, the need to moving now the high delegation to Burkina Faso. How do you expect a democratic nation to engage a country that's been run by now, I mean, as we speak, by a military junta? It rarely happens.
Well, of course, I mean, it may seem impossible to do that, or, I mean, impractical to do that. But in reality, it is happening. In spite of the fact that we have this kind of leadership in place in Burkina Faso, it still does not take away the fact that we need to work with them. We need to work together to realign the country in terms of putting them back on the path of democracy. We actually have our embassy there. We have staff there. And we have an ambassador there who is working day in and out, in there. And so there's that kind of relationship that exists. And so, like I made a call earlier, we need to have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs come in to sanitize conversation around it and chart a new path in terms of how we establish a proper and positive relationship with them. And as my brother Adib mentioned, this is a very, very serious and very delicate situation for us here in Ghana, in the sub-region, and here locally. If you've been monitoring the last 2 years, our relationship regionally in terms of security has been very, very delicate. If you look at the sanctions that were imposed on these countries that had disputes, and Ghana as ECOWAS chair, it put us in a situation where we were viewed as a country that was used by France and other Western partners to get back at this, Francophone West African countries. And for us to go do this in Washington, D.C., it further erodes the trust that we need to build with our neighbors. And so there is every indication that, all is not well, and we need to do something very seriously about it now. And all is not lost. We still have that level of engagement that can still work at the level of foreign affairs and our military leaders, regional, security leaders between the two countries.
I'm grateful. Mukhtar Mouni Mukhtar, Executive Director for the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism. You're still with us here on The Pulse. When we return, we'll talk about the internal race of the National Democratic Congress. It's hitting up. We'll tell you more.